Hello, everybody. Welcome. I deeply appreciate those of you who have the time and interest to participate by listening, and I also hope you will participate by asking questions or suggesting topics or quests that I might pursue in future videos. You know, even though I do not hear your voices or see your faces, most of you, the spirit of your interest is what motivates me to work fairly hard to talk about really important aspects of our situation, our humanity, consciousness, our minds, cognition, language, all these things and more. And you know, it's quite a privilege to be able to make something like these recordings. Even though I think, given my preference, I would have 5 or 6 of us in a room a few times a week having an actual conversation about these things and maybe pursuing missions of some kind together, noble missions. That's kind of my dream, I guess. Yeah, that's one of my dreams anyway. It may be a little bit noisy tonight. I'm out for a walk in the wind without my windscreen on. Haven't worn that thing in a while. And it's kind of rush hour too, so there's going to be traffic noise at various points. Some time ago, one of my neighbors got one of those doorbell cams, the most popular brand that I'll not hear. Name. Sorry, I was having some trouble there. Almost getting hit by a car that was running the crosswalk. Yeah, so my neighbor got one of these cams, right? I've seen them before. One of my other friends had one. And I had mixed feelings about it. I don't like being surveilled. I don't like someone who isn't me knowing every time I enter or leave my house and having photographs at that event. On the other hand, occasionally there are people with bad intent on our stoop. And so that the presence of that cam certainly limits that. But still, I find it mostly disturbing. I just don't want to be recorded everywhere I go, and I don't think my neighbor has any right to formally ascertain when I am home, when I leave, when I return, all these things. And last night I went out for a bit of an exercise walk in the evening. And when I came home, as I was ascending the front stairs, I saw a false widow spider climbing up one of the stoop walls. And so I sat down and kind of hung out with it for a moment. Let it know that I was not something it needed to be afraid of or concerned about, and, you know, in my own way, I welcomed it and said, you know, you're welcome here. And then I went in my house. And as I had been walking home, I noticed that it was garbage night, so the bins were out. And one of the neighbors had a bag of batteries, a bag of used batteries on their can. And personally, I'm a strong proponent of using rechargeables for just about anything that might require batteries. There's some brand I like. It's funny, my mind just won't produce name brands at the moment for some reason. But yeah, I use rechargeables, but occasionally you buy something and it comes with batteries, or, you know, you've got a few old ones around. So I collected up the 5 or 6 AA's, exhausted AA's that I had, and went out to put them in that bag by the bins. And I noticed that as I opened my front door, the spider that had been on the wall was crushed on the stoop. Now, I don't know exactly what happened, but if I had to bet on what's on my neighbor's Zoom camera, here's my guess. My neighbor saw me come home, pause on the stairs, sit down on the stairs, and pay very close attention to something on the wall to my left. And then they came out after I went in and looked at whatever it was I'd been looking at. Noticed it was a spider, scraped it off the wall and crushed it on the stoop. Now, that might not be what happened, but it's pretty likely that's what happened. And so, in a way, I was straight up lying to the spider, because with all my good intentions, my paying them attention at all got them immediately killed by another human. And this is the kind of irony that I regularly encounter in my life. You know, what newly minted hell will emerge from my best intentions. It certainly never occurred to me that someone observing my behavior might find it peculiar, investigate, see the spider, either just be stupid or insectophobic, arachnophobic, whatever. And kill it. Spider was at best helpful, not a nuisance, not venomous, though false widows look a bit like black widows, and they've got those long foreleg arcs. They're black. They're clumsy with climbing. So, you can see the terrifying irony. I'm interested in the spider's well-being. I respect it as a fully fledged being worthy of existence, naturally integral, meaning like not dishonest. The creature is absolutely, it acts with something resembling pure integrity in its relationships with the world and other organisms, including those it eats. It's much more trustworthy in a fundamental sense than any human you will ever meet, with the possible exception of certain children or elders, both. Why is that creature dead? And of course, it's sitting there on my stoop on the white tile, crushed, as it has been now for some, 20 hours. It's just so absurd, and yet common to my experience of humans. Particularly males, arbitrary killing of other living things based on what? Some kind of brain damage? Like an intentionally structured malformation of consciousness that poses other symbiotic organisms as something that must be killed. Burn it with fire. I've seen this throughout my whole life so many times. Obviously, I'm not feeling good about my neighbor, who seems to be a person of, some modest integrity, but is also snoopy, electronically snoopy, knows too much of what he shouldn't know about everything around his flat. Way too much. I recently wrote an essay. I think it's called Ladybird Was Angry With Me. And in that essay, I examine the unintended consequences of my organophilia. Right? I love the living beings and the plants and the insects and the microbial life and the trees and the fungi and the cacti and all the animals and the birds and the water creatures. I love them. I believe in them. I trust them. They are true in a way that nothing of what the humans generally do, and particularly nothing of what they do together, can possibly approach their integrity. I mean, for one thing, as they do not really speak, they cannot dissemble. They cannot throw the universe away in the, for the sake of abstractions, tokens, concepts, words, so forth. They don't have the form of knowledge which is blinding to relationship and participation that we have. At least, I suspect most of them mostly don't. And certainly nearly none of them have what we actually have, which is the explicit representational overlays in consciousness and cognition. I don't pretend to be an accomplished meditator. I'm not an accomplished meditator. But at the same time, I have been a student of Rinzai Zen for some 40 years, with periods of greater and lesser devotion and practice and interest and so on throughout my time. And I'm not mentioning Zen in some attempt to gain the esteem of my listeners by a tricky sort of subterfuge where I put some badge on and say I am a this, or I am a shaman, or I am a, whatever. I have things I have studied and practiced. Guitar, singing, theater, comedy, music, in general, writing, experimental writing, Zen, Catholicism, Nagualism in the sense of the Castanedan traditions, many things. And whoever I am, I wear no formal badge. I don't call myself a Buddhist or a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim. I don't really know what I am, and whatever it is, it doesn't seem to match the badges and hats very well at all. Though at the same time, it is nice to gather together with others of mutual interest and, pursue insight and understanding, knowledge, awareness, awakening. That's also a great privilege. Zen practice has always been for me relatively arduous, physically uncomfortable, profoundly austere, as in like clear of there's nothing you can think that will help you, concepts won't help you, memories won't help you, fantasies won't help you. What will help you is allowing the waters of awareness to settle into their kind of shining, reflective origins. And, I'm sure many Zen teachers would slap me and say, try again. Say, no, that's not it. And they'd be right. Because, again, it's not a language game. It's not a thing game. It's not a get something game. It might be like an ungaming game. Take away all the different aspects of the common habits of representational thought, and then take away the fantasies, and then take away the dreaming, and then begin to see just with the unobstructed, or as the unobstructed beginning, origin. I have sat some Zen, who knows how much, many hours, not many months, well, maybe some months, not many. I've done a couple of brief sesshin in my life. They were fairly terrifying going in. Not as bad once. The sort of the group intention is very powerful in producing a vehicle that can sustain day-long meditation and so forth. But still, the idea is pretty scary to me, even these days. You sit for most of 3 days, or in some case 30, some cases 90. What? But the reason that I bring up my Zen practice is that my original teacher, who I met through a curious situation involving bibliophilia, love of books. I met him through a friend at a local bookstore, a friend that worked at a local bookstore. And he's always sort of one of his primary riffs as a teacher. It has to do with what do we do when things really fall apart? They get very bad, they are very dark, they go sideways, there's no there's no hope. Often there is doom. Somebody is dying, or their life is being ruined, or whatever, really difficult. What do we do when life throws catastrophe at us? or we experience something horrifying, something we want no part of, and we have no way to inhibit it, avoid it, hide from it. What do we do? And John is quite brilliant in his exploration. And it's his suggestion that, and of course I'm paraphrasing here, but it's his suggestion that those moments are so powerful that if we will attend them mindfully, then what? Yes, of course. Well, one might say then a great treasure may be brought forth from that storm. Those moments are very fertile and profound, and we, in our common thought and reactivity, we may be very unlikely and unwilling to see in the ways that turn the disaster or the source of pain or frustration or annoyance we may not be willing to change the lens that we're using primarily to evaluate, like the lens we use to choose what to make of a situation that we may be involved in, subject to, so forth. The simplest example would be something like, I am carrying my groceries home. I didn't want to pay for a double bag. And I'm not carrying it with my arm, my hand underneath the relatively heavy bag of groceries. And, the bag splits, the milk comes out, it lands on the ground and pops, and all the milk is all over the sidewalk, and my bag is torn. Everything was fine a moment ago. I can tell myself all kinds of narratives. I was just trying to get my groceries home. Whatever I can make up about it. Or I can laugh at the sort of slapstick comedy of, okay, so the 20 cents for the bag, easily offsets the $4.25 that the milk costs. So I should always get that second bag. But when we acquire English, it comes replete with a variety of special offers, you might call them. And nearly all of these special offers comprise games. Games of structured observation, thought, declaration, evaluation of identities, values, metaphors that go along with that. Life is a journey, a relationship's a journey. Everything's a container. I possess a mind. I have some money. I have food. I have a brain, right? A vast array of mostly stupidifying games, and very dangerous games. Games that become more expensive every time we run them, and make us dumber pretty much every time we run them. So we inherit those, most of us do. Some of us will reject parts of that adeptly. We inherit these really shitty games that incline us to an us-them perspective, a win-lose perspective, a two-valued polarity. It's good or bad, and it only has one rod of value, so it's either all good or all bad. Obviously, any actual situation has infinite rods of values. Meaning that it can have 50 complex values instead of it is good or bad. And as a student of Zen, one eventually sees, usually, that the games we play interpreting our experience, deciding whether it's good or bad and why and so forth, and who's to blame and whose responsibility is it, and all these little courtroom games. We eventually recognize those as largely pathological. We may still engage in them. We are unlikely to trust them. And the more stress we may experience, the more we may sort of become compressed and collapsed under, some of us sometimes. And so then those habits will, in that situation, usually similar habits will rise into dominance in awareness again, and we will be troubled. We will feel the agony of our mind attacking itself by forming figments and stories and courtroom dramas. You said this, you did this, you told me, you blah blah blah, whatever the the weird soap opera that's going on as our own minds. They shouldn't have blah blah. This isn't right. And of course, lots of those things aren't right, and perhaps they shouldn't have. Not the point. The point is, freedom in consciousness requires that we make a distinction between the narratives and the root of our mind, our awareness. Because if those two things begin to seem or act like they're the same thing, we have lost nearly all the available liberty that consciousness conveys. And those liberties are precious. And once they are gone, we will be likely to respond very poorly to that in a broad variety of different ways, most of which have to do with defecting from awareness. Drugs, alcohol, the vices in general, various addictions, so forth. because the root sense of being at home in one's awareness and body and moment and situation, that thing can be fracked. That absolutely necessary virtue. That thing can be fracked by conceptual gambits. Consider what happened to me last night. It would appear that my actions are purely innocent. I noticed the spider climbing the wall. I am curious what kind of organism it is. I want to know more about it. I sit near it, observe it, psychically transmit my esteem and my concern for its well-being, go in my house. What have I done? Well, due to the door cam, what I have done is alert my neighbor to an interloper that in his mind must be destroyed. And so all of my well-meaning behavior was not merely for nothing. It had the absolute opposite result of everything I hoped for. Alright, so that's one narrative, and we can all see how, if that's what actually took place, the narrative is sensible. But what if I suspend my evaluation of myself, the spider, or my vicious neighbor? Yeah, what if I suspend the evaluations and I don't form a courtroom narrative of what is supposed to or not supposed to happen, or what represents the fulfillment or the violation of my desires and feelings? What if I examine the series in ways that I don't usually do? So for example, what if, and this may sound absurd, but in a way it's less absurd than what we commonly actually do. What if I imagine that the apparent sequence of the events actually occurred in reverse order, so that my neighbor comes out onto the porch, uncrushes the spider at his foot, unscrapes the spider off the wall to where it can be easily destroyed, and goes back into his house, watches the door video, proceeds to whatever he was doing before that, as do I in backwards. Come out of my house, look at the spider, go walk backwards up the hill behind my house and so forth. Now that may sound ridiculous because it may seem that nothing like that can possibly have happened. In fact, something like that just did happen in our consciousness. It can certainly happen. Especially if what we're working with is what we have in mind. What we have in mind goes backwards, forwards, up, down, all kinds of ways. And in a far less absurd move, less seemingly absurd, I might just imagine that the events that took place do not have intrinsic values. And though I am sad for the loss of the spider and my role in it, I do not have to make the narratological structure that indicts me or my neighbor or the spider in any way. I don't have to form value-laden interpretations. You know, the people at large, we are suffering a lot more these days than, say, 5 years ago, most of us. Many of us, in any case. And we hear a great deal about therapeutic systems that might help us to ameliorate the results of carrying trauma, or to, in simple terms, in simple terms, to heal the trauma. And this is a laudable goal, though there are many parasites in the garden who, aren't actually skillful or charge way too much money, or both. The funny thing is, the trauma in us that we carry, so to speak, this is dangerous language to use, but I'm using it because it is commonly used this way. As if the trauma is something we possess, as if the trauma has to be processed and dealt with and brought forward into conscious awareness and decharged and replaced with the better images and so forth. Okay, all probably good. But lots of nefarious nonsense happens in the cult of I victim, right? And I just want to say for myself, throughout my life, a few people have engaged in behavior toward me or involving me that was fucking painful and in some cases vicious, and occasionally intentionally vicious too. And, I've had some bad experiences, but the thing that's relatively true for me personally, and I'm not claiming this is true for others, is that most of the suffering I have endured well, there are various different kinds of layers, right? There's like the socio-cultural suffering, which is different. But the suffering that I've endured that seemed to be the more or less direct result of the behavior of humans I'm relating with, or, I'm connected with somehow. Most of that suffering is not from what the people did to me. Most of that load of trauma that I may be carrying in my little train car, most of that is from my reaction to what happened. That's what caused most of the pain that I'm carrying. It is not so much the event, it's what I made of the event in consciousness and how I evaluated the roles, the transformations, the transactions, the meaning, the intention, all these things. And by far the lion's share of the pain, most of it, maybe, 73% of the pain that I'm carrying from interactions with other humans directly, most of that comes from me, even if they did something that was pretty shitty. My reaction to what they did is where most of the actual trauma came from. So in a sense, if I go delving into my heart, body, and psyche in search of trauma, we're going to find quite a bit of it that I buried there. Like, I made that stuff myself. Now, lots of other people have more or less... there are situations in which somebody just really hurt me or did something really fucking mean, or cruel. And sometimes that was conscious and sometimes not. But if we take the evaluations off and we just see what was done, without any evaluations, the chance for insight grows dramatically, because as I learned in a long conversation with a friend the other night, the moment that my consciousness forges the elements required to indict or prosecute someone, I'm going to lose 17 different kinds of seeing right now. They will all get exchanged for the one product of the lens that arises in consciousness through which I see circumstances and situations. That lens makes its own gravity wells. So it's just like a series of collapses towards seeing a single way. If I want to prosecute my neighbor, I'm going to exchange 7 kinds of insight for one kind of essentially disease. And the disease will claim to know what happened, what is good, what is righteous, what is accursed, and all of these things. I recently had a very disappointing adventure, and it was momentous for me, for reasons that I'll keep to myself. And it went very badly, and I could easily see how, if I were so inclined, I could blame at least 2 of the people involved. And produce a kind of courtroom, prosecutorial drama, right? Where person A, abdicating from their clear responsibilities, subjected me and many other people to dire risk or even death. And then person B perhaps acted in a confused and confusing fashion over a reasonably long sequence of interactions. So if I choose to see that way, and I can, mostly I just feel like ripped off or angry or hurt. But something inside me has resisted seeing it that way. Even though I'm capable of, forming the model, something's really resisted that. And has just remained without an interpretation. And I gotta say, that's a huge relief compared to what I would feel, experience, and become if I truly, deeply took offense. Right? And it's a really interesting phrase in English, to take offense. Again, you can see the container metaphor here, right? Once I take offense, I now have to carry it. Myself is like a bag into which things are put, or I put things. But yeah, if I take offense, effectively it's like growing, I don't know. It's like growing a really spiny, thorny cactus in your bed. And just every time you lie down, it just stabs you. Right? But you keep growing it anyway by giving the thoughts and feelings, and particularly, what do? We resuscitate the model, right? That person did this person did that, these things are wrong, they should have done this, I deserve something, blah, I'm entitled, whatever the thing is, right? What we do is, in consciousness, we keep revisiting the court case sequentially over time, reiterating it, embellishing it, emphasizing certain features, de-emphasizing others, and it just gets sharper and sharper until effectively our mind has become a knife that cuts itself. There's no upside to that whatsoever. Even a purely pragmatic person would never do that even one time. And yet many of us have spent thousands of hours of our lives in contemplation of wrongs previously done to us, rightful things of which we were deprived, or couldn't, found no way to obtain, so to speak. Again, the possession metaphor, obtain, to get, to win, and so forth. So you can see that energetically the cost of me highlighting the three elements, the travel, person A's behavior, person B, and then what actually took place. Right? I could highlight those three elements, embellish them, make a court case in my consciousness, go after them, like a dog chasing a shadow somewhere in my mind. And just keep funding that loop, that tape loop in my thought and my emotional body and my physical body. That would suck. That would literally suck. It would suck the life and like the vitality out of my heart. And to whatever degree I engage in behavior like that, it's so painful that one naturally seeks some kind of anesthesia, right? And it can be painful even if we're not reiterating it in consciousness. It can be painful if the thorn that was forged of a specific interpretation and evaluation, if that thorn is hidden inside us and we don't bring it into consciousness, but it's still stuck there somehow, right, in us. It's also expensive and painful. So certainly we would be better off in nearly all cases by doing almost anything other than form the prosecutorial indictment, court case, mindset. And, if there are exceptions to that, they are simple and expedient. That person violated me in such a way that a lawsuit is the natural result, so I hire a lawyer and we sue them. Or, even though the idea that one can be compensated for pain is pretty bizarre and doesn't usually work very well. Neither do actual courts. But what I'm trying to say is there might be situations in which somebody's actually pretty obviously mistreating us. And we have to get the fuck away from that, like get that person out of our life or that situation or whatever. And so for that, we have to be conscious of the problem in some way. But offense is about the most expensive thing I can take. And if I'm going to get something from a bad experience, I'd much rather have something profound and joyful and vital and alive and playful and creative than a prosecutorial narrative of, Joe did this and then she should have blah blah and whatever, Which those are actual feelings, right? The feelings of the part of me that is upset and feels slighted and is inclined to take offense. But yeah, offense is really heavy to carry. Try it. See if you'll find offense somewhere, dig it up, and try to carry that thing. It's not going to work. You're not even going to be able to drag a small part of the fence around with you. And the problem in consciousness is that you can drag a huge fence around with you. And it gets heavier every time you make a move, and you can't tell because you can't see it. So, the way we invest ourselves in our lives and their story, our life arc, and our life arcs, and the way, like many of the most important behaviors are not explicitly, not like in a cold, hard, total way, but they are things we refrain from doing. And much of intelligence is like this. It's like if you want complex, sophisticated consciousness, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit you need to avoid, because once the hand of your mind is wrapped around any one of those, it is no longer free for more, fulfilling, astonishing, or creative endeavor. So a lot of the quest to see better, which is my primary quest, and also perhaps the quest to be less wrong, which means to improve slightly my ability to understand or convey or experience, hopefully even participate in life. I can bring that up a notch somehow if I'm very careful and attentive and focused. Now that's an improvement mindset, and by the way, just to be clear, Zen isn't about improving anything. I don't know how to say what Zen is about. I can make face noises around it, like a moth circling a electric light bulb. And Zen isn't really the topic of my concern tonight. I mention it because I like John Terence Roshi's, and I encourage you to look him up and read an essay, or a short essay or two of his, if nothing more. Tarrant, I believe. No, his perspective that, when your life becomes a dumpster fire for whatever reason, or your situation just collapses into the least desirable or a very undesirable mess, that's the best place to slow down, take a breath, come back into your body, release your interpretations, just let them dissolve, and be present. And if you will do that, if you will resist the urge to vilify, identify, evaluate, arrange in sequence, interpret the yeah, it's a huge problem. Interpret the progression of events. If you can resist that, then your mind will naturally shine with something much richer and more trustworthy than what our minds are usually doing when they're very wrapped up in narratizing experience and then evaluating those narratives. So Terence Roshi sees the jewel in the sewer, so to speak, and trusts that it is nearly always the case, or will become the case, that if we practice attentive, compassionate, aware mindfulness in the grip of the lion's mouth, the light we shall encounter there will be true and profound and perhaps even healing. And I think he's onto something there, this old Australian Zen teacher. I think he's onto something there. Because even in my own experience, to the degree that I am unwilling to judge, adjudicate, my own recent experience, to the degree I remain in suspense about the meaning and the values and the identities of the beings and circumstances in question, it feels like floating on water that I would otherwise drown in. Like the water just naturally holds me up to the degree that I don't insist upon declaring qualities and character and characteristics. So I hope this idea is useful. I'm reminded by it of a few other things. One of them is the profundity of gappiness, which is a kind of a giddy hilarity that can ensue in relation with sequences of gaps. But there is a stranger problem similarly associated for us moderns, which is the interpretation of gaps in communication. Since we can text, and text is instantaneous, why would someone not immediately respond? And you can see that this form of evaluation is going to lead to paranoia, misevaluation, judgment, indictments, all these things. Anyone who is too sensitive to their expectation of the rhythm, particularly a mechanical rhythm, such as those produced by social media, so forth, that's going to become a huge problem in their consciousness to the degree they allow it purchase. And what was the other thing? You know, freedom, liberty is a principle that I'm fond of and believe in. Not necessarily the formalized kind. So easily lost because it's so easily if I decide to do the indictment, dance with my recent history, what will happen is it will be as if I'm taking threads of my soul and packing them into these tubes. And each time these tubes of, this person did X and that person didn't do Y and so forth. And as I pack those tubes with the thread of my soul is partly missing from me. It's as if I've evicted vital organs of myself, non-ordinary organs that I absolutely need moment to moment. And so for anyone who actually wants liberty, what you're going to do is just retrieve those strands from the tubes completely. Like, you will draw all of your investment back into yourself naturally. And without investment in a narrative, this is part of the problem with I am a victim. And look, I am a victim too. I'm not saying it's not one way or the other. It's 19 ways. But there's so much danger in anything that encourages us to keep investing energy, thought, emotion, soma, in historical events. Like, we would be much better off simply retrieving any previously invested attention, energy, concern, and using that to proceed onward with our lives. There are tropes about this. I think the most common is Lot's wife as they're leaving Sodom, which is being destroyed ostensibly by fire from the sky. She turns and looks back and turns into a pillar of salt. It's very expensive to maintain that structure, that painful arrangement of evaluations in our thoughts and in our hearts. Extremely expensive. Becomes more expensive every time we fail to dissolve that thing somehow. You know, there is a particular, there are structures in my heart and psyche that I have preserved for many years. There's a kind of a special magical museum of things that really hurt. Or that I really hurt myself with. Right? I took the pain in the same way that one might take offense. I took the agony. And yeah, there's a little Spanish, up in the mountain, this museum. The gallery of the knives in my heart. And, being a romantic person, it is relatively natural for me to form and sustain such galleries. And I have a degree of compassion myself about that. But as I'm getting older, I'm realizing that there's so much invested in each one of those little scenes. So much of my life force, my élan vital, l'élan vital, that I might prosper mightily by dissolving them, or at least withdrawing some of my investment in them. So, these are my thoughts for this evening. I hope some of you may have found something useful here. I am quite surprised, actually, that that I was willing to suspend my indictments about my recent misadventures. And it really was as if something inside me was just saying, no, don't do that. Just don't do that one thing. Do whatever else you want to do. Just don't do that thing. And it's helping me to see much more clearly, because inside me it hasn't turned into a prosecutor. And so I can have 5 or 6 different lenses in play rather than one. And that's a lot more liberty than I would get from the other move. Perhaps there are some features of your own life and world that bear resemblance to what I have been orbiting tonight. And perhaps you may experiment with suspending your evaluations in a situation where you feel extremely compelled to have some. In a situation in which you are definitely in danger of taking offense, or worse still, of taking offense and taking the pain. So may your paths be beautiful and blessed, and may they be filled with insight. Find companions, rich dreaming, and wonderful memory. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye for now.